let's get the doors locked before anyone else gets out. Did everyone leave? And it's because they're desperate to go and listen to the band.
That's exactly what it is. First off, I think if we had a house full of Delia Smith fans, I don't think we do anymore.
I feel quite bad for Delia Smith. I mean, she probably didn't expect that moment to ever be dredged up for a documentary. It's like 40 years later.
So first off, why don't you take us back to the beginning? How the idea came about, how you pulled the idea together, how long you've been working on it?
So the idea came from, I was having a conversation with Carla as I was making a video for her band Teen Canteen. And we didn't really know each other that well at the time, but we were kind of nerding out on, we were talking about female representation in music videos actually, and in particular girl bands, and girl bands rather than girl groups, just to, I mean there's probably not that much of a difference between them anymore, but yeah, how we felt things normally played out. And then straight on to bands that we knew, and then straight on to Scottish bands that we knew. And Carla, I knew some, Carla knew more, and she said I've always wanted to make a documentary about them. So it seemed like a perfect combination between my background as a filmmaker and Carla's intentions with the documentary. And it just grew from there. Actually, we started filming almost immediately. We went and I knew Libby MacArthur from Sophisticated Boom Boom, so that was the very first person we interviewed.
And you use many different storytelling devices within the film, but obviously there's a heavy use of archive in there. How much of a struggle was that to find the archive? Was there a lot of trawling through to do? Sorry, just 2 seconds. Yeah, could you drop that level a wee bit as well? We're still getting feedback down here.
It was, at first we thought there was going to be virtually none, but then when you start speaking to people, they mention like a BBC performance, so you think, okay, well if we can get access to that archive then we might be able to find stuff. So it worked. Some bands there was just none, and we knew that we're never going to find any more. The McKinleys was, we knew there was that TV performance, we knew they'd been on TV another couple of times beyond that, but there wasn't much hope of finding that stuff. That's probably going to be my next project after this project's out the way, is continuing to dig for the stuff which is sort of lost, and presumed buried under the M25, as a lot of that archive from TV is. But other stuff, the bands actually had loads themselves. Or if they didn't have it, they remembered being on television, so we could go and dig. As soon as the BBC came on board, that became a lot easier. We could go and have a really good dig in their archive. There's still stuff we couldn't find, which was annoying. But yeah, a lot of the archive came from fans, beyond the band themselves. The rest of it came from fans and them having recorded stuff off TV. Because actually there's some stuff we got off the VHS that someone had that we couldn't find in the BBC archive. So it's either been lost or just badly labelled, and so the searches that the archive researcher would do just couldn't show them up.
And how hard was it to get hold of the members of the bands? Because obviously for quite a few of them it was one album and then moving on. Like, how difficult was it to track down each individual members, and was there anybody that you didn't get that you really wanted?
That's a good question. Most of the bands we were able to find, we had quite a few inroads. I knew one at Long Leg and I knew one in the New Levy. Others were still sort of relatively easy to find, like the Hedrons. But people, like with his latest Flame, Moira, who's a singer now, lives in Italy, and wasn't really so much in touch with the rest of the band. So we came across her, Carla found her email on some forum of people just talking about bands, and she happened to pitch in, so we kind of latched onto that and sort of worked out how to contact her. But in truth, with Facebook and Instagram and the other social media platforms which are available, it's actually quite easy to get hold of people. I was trying to think if there was anyone that we really wanted to get. No, I mean, but I always like to point out that the documentary is not comprehensive. We're not try to say that's every band that existed. There are some others out there, but just through how many bands were already in the documentary, we decided to have more of the stories which are in and spread it over less bands. So there's a few honourable mentions that you hear some that's in the documentary, but there's more beyond that. But I think we got everyone that we wanted to. We had to really push for some. Like Mo from Longleg, it took us ages to get Mo on board. Just because it wasn't, she wasn't really speaking to the rest of the band so much anymore, and I think it's easy for people to be a little bit suspicious about what you're doing and what kind of stories you want to dredge up. So we really focused on getting people on board and know that we were, it was a bit positivity of the band experience as much as possible.
Now I will open to the floor for questions, but just before I do that, I just wanted to look like the story. It's very much part historical story, part love letter, but it's also quite a damning indictment of the music industry to female bands. How careful were you that you were trying to balance that throughout the documentary?
Yeah, it went through various shapes. I think when we first began it, we thought, right, now let's just make a celebration of the bands and the music and the people. But as we spoke to everyone, the same stories kept coming up and up. It kept coming up over and over again. And it just felt like we were doing it disjustice to it all if we didn't touch on the issues that the women experienced. And obviously Carla knew, and the documentary is sort of largely from Carla's perspective because she's lived it. So it felt wrong not to talk about that stuff, and it's current. It's not a thing of the past. The stories that we heard from the 80s or even from the 60s and the 70s they still happen. So I don't think you can make a documentary like this without them going into that. And the harder thing was getting that balance right and when to start talking about those issues. Because we had it, at one point we had it laced throughout, so it was a bit of a roller coaster up and down, but that didn't feel quite right. It didn't feel, I can't quite remember what was wrong with that version, but it just didn't feel weighted right. Then we had one which, honestly, the whole last half hour was just grim. It was so upsetting to hear all these stories in a row. So we eventually settled on the shape that it is just now, where you get as much celebration as you can, but then get just why it never works out.
And towards the end, you list some really damning statistics there, but you take that and you flip it to a bit of a positive note and changes that are being brought in, specifically by women and non-binary people within the music industry. Was that always the idea, to show that it doesn't have to be like this? We can make a change. Yeah,
certainly it was Carla's objective always to end on a positive political future, and she didn't really want to victimise anyone. And there is a movement, and I think we felt strongly it was important to give the last word almost to the grassroots movements, which are really pushing change. And yeah, we do have a bit of a go at the record industry, because I do think it's no coincidence. I was walking around Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, and the only poster I saw, which was sort of slightly higher level, all-female or predominantly female band, was the Last Dinner Party. So if you just ask anyone in the street to name any number of all-female bands or predominantly female bands, they will struggle. And the bands are there. I mean, actually, we don't show as many bands. What that last 15 minutes should have done is really show you just how many bands there are now. So it's really on the doorstep of the record industry now to change who they think is worth signing, and to ditch the attitudes that you hear talked about in the documentary.
That's great. Now, in turn to the audience for any questions. If anybody has any, if you raise your hand, we've got them couple of microphones going about, and hopefully they're a little bit quieter than we started off this evening. Does anybody out there have a bit breaking? Oh, yeah. So we've got one just there. It's always good to have someone start us off.
It seems like throughout the whole film, it's like grassroots organisation of like female bands doing it themselves to begin with, and then these organisations having to do it themselves as well. Is there any sense, and did any of your interviewees or yourself or Carla have any sense that it was changing within the industry at all, or through government initiatives or local council or anything, or is it still all coming from marginalised groups themselves?
Yeah, no, it still feels the same in truth. No is the really short answer to that. It doesn't really feel... Yeah, you occasionally see a band getting signed, and it took over the 8 years we've been making this. I had this really stupid worry that, or perhaps it's all going to change, and the documentary will seem really outdated before we've even finished it. But of course, progress is so slow. But yeah, there's only really been one or two. If you're into left field indie music, you know there's loads of bands. But in terms of breaking through that barrier into the real kind of public realm, where bands become household names, or even just you're familiar with names and posters, that's still nowhere near the correct balance. And it seems it doesn't solve still. And the bands are there. That's something that the documentary only kind of hints at. There's way more bands we could have gone and found to build that big list. Although I should point out that's only one prism to look at it through, because as some of the bands that in the documentary always like to point out, that's only one version of success. I mean, just forming a band and going out and playing gigs, that's great too. But yeah, I think it's reflected, if you're looking at the music industry specifically, then the balance is miles off. Embarrassingly so.
Do you have any other questions? Yep, we've got one up here, Graham.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. The first one is, like, through the event series and the screenings that's taken place, have you received interest, or are you having conversations that is indicating that, you know, just creating awareness through this film is going to foster some of that change, or some initiatives beyond those featuring in the end part of the film? You know, are you seeing some positivity just through the screenings, and it could be organisations, could be like just individuals looking to do something with it?
I don't think it's as a result of the documentary, but Girls Rock Glasgow's reformed. We filmed them years ago, but then because it disbanded, it felt a bit weird to feature them, and also clearances for people under 16. It's really hard to organise. It's certainly Girls Rock Glasgow. I don't know if Girls Rock Edinburgh ever disappeared, but there'd been a documentary about them anyway. But Girls Rock Glasgow is reformed, and I don't know if this might be slightly misinterpreting the question, but I don't know if there's a bunch of bands out there anyway who are existed without the help of the documentary. So I think it might take a bit until we hopefully see that the documentary's done some good as well. The band, actually, just we're tying two things here. The last band that you hear in the documentary, at the Corps, the last song that played over the credits, they were a band that Carla's not here tonight because every Monday night Carla goes to an art centre in Greenock and works with young people to help them develop bands. And Carla came across the Chords through that. The Chords are wonderful, real kind of C86 sounds, if you like that kind of thing. And they've been supporting everyone, they're all over Glasgow. So I hope the documentary does some good in that respect. But I kind of feel like it was happening anyway. I think there's so many bands out there. Yeah.
what's next? What's next? Are you going to have some sort of follow-up to this? You were saying there's some stuff that you weren't able to feature, McKinley's project, for example.
Yeah, well, just about every band in it deserves their own documentary. I don't think greedy and save those documentaries for us, but I'm not quite sure. Carla hates that question for somebody asked us it in an interview. And because Carla's a musician and has been asked that kind of stuff before, I'm more okay with that. I think people like what you've done and they want to know what you're going to do next. I think it's a legitimate question. But I'm not sure is the actual answer. I've got a few things lined. I had a project with pastels I've been trying to do for ages, and this documentary became so all-consuming that everything else had to be put in the back burner. So I've got a few things I want to get back to. Carla's just finished recording a new album, so I suspect she'll be off back in the music world for a little bit. But certainly, yeah, we were talking about other documentaries. Maybe I should keep Carla's ideas under wraps because she's not here to talk about themselves. But yeah, certainly a few off the back of this. Not necessarily the bands which are in the documentary, but a few people that we interviewed and didn't use, and they're in seminal bands that deserve their own documentaries. But I think it's quite hard to make a documentary about that many different bands. That was probably one of the hardest things, and to feel like you're doing everyone justice. So there's so many stories that get cut out that it feels nice to revisit them in some other ways. So maybe we'll do a sort of in between where we put stuff out on the internet, which like extended versions of interviews, and possibly some archive that we've got but couldn't quite feature in the film for one reason or another might find its way onto YouTube.
It's a good way to grab some of that stuff that always ends up in a curtain room floor.
Yeah.
Modern day DVD extras.
Yeah, that's what the archive is so expensive. I've done some DVDs for bands before, and we bought in like a whole performance from top of the box, and it was like about £4,000. So I thought that's what we'd be able to do that for this, and put as much of it in the documentary as we could. But for broadcast and cinema release, that £4,000, £5,000 covers the minute instead of the whole track. So I had to be really careful with how much we put in. And I don't know if this will get a DVD release, but yeah, if it does, I'd love to ram it full of all the performances, and because you just get a taste of them. We don't get to see much of it.
Do we have any other questions out there? Yeah, we've got one in the middle of the row.
My question's actually about the DVD, and my good friend in Singapore asked if it's going to be available on DVD to buy, so I think there's a market out there for it.
Yeah, well, I would hope so. And the sense of, not everyone's going to go out to the cinema. I'm so happy that everyone's come to this, because I think it's a great film for seeing in that sort of context. But yeah, a lot of people. I'm a big buyer of DVDs. Still, I think it's a realistic record to be able to have. And that's my dream actually for making documentaries, something you do want to watch over and over again. So I'd be delighted if it could make its way to DVD release. But I know, unfortunately, technically, I don't think they make much money anymore. Not that you would necessarily do it just for the money, but I think even just to cover the cost of manufacturing versus how many you're likely to sell, given that, I don't know if you know it's 12 funded it, but there's a high chance it'll be on a viewing platform online for a certain period of time. But yeah, of course there's territories beyond that, beyond where iPlayer might allow people to view it, and so for a more global audience, I would hope a DVD's going to be possible at some point. But I have no idea if it will actually happen or not.
And have you got any plans for that kind of wider European and worldwide release of the film when you get out? Because quite a lot of the bands featured made it big in other countries as well, so actually from that point of view.
Strawberry Switchblade were huge in Japan. I mean, played much bigger venues there than they did here. So we've got a distributor who deals with all that kind of stuff, and no suggestions have been made, but there's quite a sort of narrow window between now and when it'll eventually get broadcast, and festivals tend to stop accepting films after they've been broadcast. So I don't know if the timing was really going to work out for that. But yeah, I would love to see it go abroad. I think certainly we always saw it as like an international film because we thought, even if you don't know the bands necessarily, we hope people picked up on the fact that every country in the world will have these bands who may also be laying kind of generally undiscovered. So we wanted to try and orientate it towards feeling like a film that even if you didn't know these bands, then you would recognise that the equivalent of these bands would exist in your own country. But we just had the window within which it could go to international festivals was so small. It's got an American premiere next week, I think, but it's not one of the bigger festivals. But it's still cool that it's happening. I'm really pleased that that's going to go. It might spread after that through word of mouth, who knows. But yeah, I think there's more different markets could see it.
And just on that kind of festival circuit, I know that it was at Edinburgh this year as well. How was that for you to have that? What's a world-renowned, probably, I think it's one of, if not the oldest film festival, at least in Europe, if not the world. How was that in terms of having the prestige of closing that?
Yeah, that felt incredible. There was other festivals that we were considering or were trying to get into, like Sheffield, which is an incredible documentary festival. It's also world-renowned, but something always felt weird about it not being shown in Scotland first. And we were sort of falling between the two Glasgow film festivals that it could have gone to. Timing-wise, we were too late for the one at the beginning of this year, and we knew it wouldn't be possible to show it in 2025. So the sudden appearance of Edinburgh just fit in so many ways, and yeah, it's such a privilege to have that prestige of the last film. So it's just an extra bump up, and I think that's what kicks everything off. Really, the cinema run's been beyond what we could have imagined, and I think it was Edinburgh picking up on it and the timing working out that's put the film about. I actually don't even care so much about the film as the bands in the film. That's been the most rewarding thing for us. How much press coverage all the bands have gotten. Jeanette Gallagher was on the front cover of the Saturday Herald supplement, and then it had a 5-page spread. It was incredible. And this is someone who's had a music career she just thought was the thing of the past. She just cares about her family. And it's been so amazing for the spotlight to be turned back on these people via the documentary.
Alright, I think we have time for one more question if anybody has one. No?
That's been so comprehensive.
In which case, I'll wrap us up with, normally I would just finish as tell us what's next for you, but someone out there already stole my question. So thinking on the spot, can you tell me what you think, or what you would hope the legacy for Sinchesterby will be?
I hope it sort of irreversibly puts the bands from the documentary in the list of bands that get celebrated in Scotland. Scotland's got this incredible inverse talent pool for the amount of great music that comes out of Scotland versus the population is insane. It's incredible. But we noticed that it was the same band, and I get why the other bands are celebrated because they're all great and I know they have global audiences. But yeah, we noticed the same bands were getting overlooked again and again, and they were getting overlooked because the record industry sort of overlooked them too. So to hopefully change that for good, that feels very satisfying. And I hope also that affects change in terms of who the public knows out there and who the record industry thinks about signing. Because that, it sort of takes, I think we're in a really interesting era where just about anyone can make music and get it on Spotify, but that in itself means there's a much bigger pool, and it's easy to get lost in that. Not a pool, that's a bad metaphor, but the forest or wherever, wherever a big number of things is, it's easy to get lost in. And so in truth, that's where a record company kind of does do a good job, because they put a lot of money into promotion and getting you out there and getting you on radio, if that's what you want your music to do. So yeah, I forgot where I was going with that. What was the question again?
Legacy.
Oh yeah, legacy. So yeah, I hope it helps with that. I hope it, by putting the spotlight on all these bands, people recognise what has been overlooked and needs to stop being overlooked.
Great. Well, Blair, thank you so much for allowing us to screen your film, and I hope you, the film, and all the bands featured go from strength to strength. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for coming. And congratulations to the residents. We should go to the festival. We should get the chance to come and see everything. Okay. Yes. Definitely. Okay, thanks.